Welcome to lesson 9.6. We're going to solve rational equations today. And the method by which we're going to solve is by multiplying through by the lowest common denominator. So let's start easy. This first example already has a common denominator of 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply through by that lowest common denominator of 3. And when I multiply through, I'm only going to multiply the numerator. So for example, I'm going to say 3 times the x, 3 times the 1, and 3 times the 5. And what's going to happen is if I multiply through everything, first of all, my equation still holds true because we know that as long as whatever we do to one side of an equation we also do to the other, that the equation is still technically true. And so the other thing that this allows us to do is now go through and cancel out the denominator. And so what we'll have here, what we'll have left is the x plus the 1 equals 5. And so we have a nice equation that is very easy to solve, and we can find that x equals 4 in this case. In the next example, the lowest common denominator is one that we'll have to find. So I'm going to identify it here as 2x. And so now what I'll do is go through and multiply everything in every single numerator by 2x. So I'm going to multiply this by 2x, this by 2x, and this 11 by 2x. And now watch what happens. Because the lowest common denominator isn't already in every single fraction yet, only certain parts are going to cancel. So in the first fraction, the x's will cancel. In the second fraction, just the 2's will cancel. And in the third one, the x's will cancel. And so what I'm going to have left is I will have the 2 times the 4, which will give me 8, plus, and then x times 5, that's 5x, and then 11 times 2, or sorry, negative 11 times 2, that'll give me negative 22. And so I've gotten rid of the fractions, and now I have a nice easy equation that I should be able to solve very quickly to find that the answer is negative 6. And now the other thing we want to consider when we start having x's in the bottom of fractions is we always want to make sure that we check our answers. And the way that we check our answers is by plugging in our answer for x. So we'll have 4 over negative 6 plus 5 halves equals negative 11 over negative 6. And if I plug it into my calculator, I should get the right answer. And sure enough, I get 1.83 repeating on the left and 1.83 repeating on the right. I get a true statement, so I know my answer works. So now let's identify the common denominator for this next example. I identify it as 25x, and so now I'm going to go and multiply everything by 25x. So 25x here times 25x here. And now here on the left, the x's will cancel. Here on the right, the 25's will cancel. So here I get 25 equals x squared. And so now I'm going to solve this quadratic. And if I have an x squared equals a number, I'll just use my square root property. And I'll remember that I'm going to get two answers. Positive and negative 5 are my two answers to x. And so now, now I need to check all of my answers. So I'll need to check the 5 and the negative 5. So 1 over 5 equals 5 over 25. Yep, that's going to be a true statement. And now I'll check the other one. 1 over negative 5. Does that equal negative 5 over 25? And sure enough, it'll simplify perfectly. So here's our next example. I'm going to identify my common denominator. Here it's going to be x plus 1, x minus 1. So I'm going to multiply through by that common denominator on everything. So x plus 1, x minus 1, and then x plus 1, x minus 1. It's helpful to write everything down so that we don't lose track of what we're writing. Now, the denominators, I'll also put parentheses around because that'll help me see that on the left the x plus 1's will cancel, and on the right the x minus 1's will cancel. So this gives me the equation negative 3 times the quantity x minus 1 equals 4 times the quantity x plus 1. And now I have a nice, easy equation that I can solve very quickly And after doing a little bit of algebra, I get x equals negative 1/7. And of course, every time I get an answer, I'm going to want to do a check. So I check my answer by plugging in negative 1/7 for x. And I'm going to have to use my calculator here. And I'll see, do I get the same decimal when I plug in those numbers? And I do, negative 3.5 on both sides. So my answer is good. So let's do this one. We have to identify our common denominator. So I'm going to factor first. If I have to factor, I should. I get x plus 3x minus 3, which means my lowest common denominator is x plus 3x minus 3. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to multiply everything by that common denominator. So x plus 3, x minus 3, x plus 3, x minus 3. And on the left side, this is nice, everything cancels. And on the right side, the x minus 3's will cancel. And it leaves me with the equation 2x equals 5 times the quantity x plus 3. Now I have a nice, easy equation to solve. I get the answer x is negative 5, which of course I will then go and check. And of course the easiest way to check is just to plug in the left into your calculator, and when I do I get the decimal negative 0.625, and then do the right side again and I get the same answer on both sides. Whoops, that's the same number. And it checks out. So here's another one. Let's multiply through by our common denominator. In this case, my common denominator is x minus 1. So I'm going to multiply everything in the first by x minus 1. Everything, this 5 here that's added, I'm going to multiply that by x minus 1. And on the right side, I'll multiply by x minus 1. Now, let's see what cancels. This leaves me with 5x plus 5 times the quantity x minus 1 equals 15. Simplify. And I have a nice, easy equation to solve now. And I get the answer x equals 2. And now I'm going to check my answer, because remember, we always, always, always check our answers. And I should get the statement 15 equals 15. I'm good to go. So here's another one. Let's identify our common denominator. Here it's going to be x times x plus 2. So I'm going to multiply everything through by that common denominator. Everything over here, x, x plus 2, the whole entire thing, x, x plus 2 for every term. And then I'm going to cancel what will cancel. This leaves me with x times the quantity x minus 2 is equal to 3 times the quantity x plus 2. Now I'm going to simplify. After I do my distributive property, I notice that I have a quadratic term, so I'm going to get my equation equal to 0. And now I will factor and solve, and this will factor into x minus 6, x plus 1 equals 0. And then to solve these, I'll set each of the parentheses equal to 0, and I will solve them to get two answers, 6 and negative 1, as my two solutions. And again, I always need to check them, and so I will check them both. And so here are my two checks. Both of the solutions worked, so both of the answers are my solutions. Here's one last example that we can do. First of all, my common denominator is going to be x times x minus 4. And so again, I'll just multiply through everything by this quantity. So I'll multiply here by x, x minus 4, here by x, x minus 4, and here by x, x minus 4. And now I'll go through and cancel what will cancel. And this will leave me with x times x minus 3 from the first fraction, plus 4x times x minus 4 equals 3x times x minus 4. Whew, quite a bit. So I'm still going to go through and distribute and simplify and combine all of my like terms together, and it'll look a little bit like this. And the second I start seeing x squareds, I might want to try getting this thing equal to 0 because it looks like a quadratic to solve. So on the left side I'll have 5x squared minus 19x is equal to 3x squared minus 12x. So when I get it equal to 0, I get this equation, 2x squared minus 7x equals 0. Now I'm going to solve by factoring. I'm going to factor out a greatest common factor of x. And when I do that, I get the two equations, x equals 0, and I get the other answer as x equals 7/2 when I set each of these two factors equal to 0 and solve. So I've got these two answers right now, but again, it is vitally important to check every answer, because when I check, here's what happens. So here's my check on the left side in purple, and you'll see down at the bottom the 7/2 solution, that worked okay. But when I plugged in 0, here's what happened. Everything worked great until the very end when I had a 0 in the bottom. And so what I have here is an undefined quantity. And the minute I start having a 0 in the bottom of a fraction, that tells me right there that this solution is what we call extraneous. So that x equals 0 is not actually a solution. It's extraneous, because it created an undefined value in my equation. So if you ever have a 0 in the bottom of a fraction, that'll tell you right there that that solution is not really a solution. It's an extraneous solution, and you should not list it as one of your answers.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.